think so. Boy. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I have attention, please? All quiet, please. Thank you. So, yeah, this is recording for all those at home. Some students have been sending me different things because I'm getting those posted. When I post the videos of the in-class stuff, you don't have to. That's for the remote, the at-home students, unless you want to watch it again or see what happens in another class, although this is the second time I videotaped yours. I could videotape the others. I do 4 different 11th grade. It's weird. In the past, I've always just done 1. I mean, in the past, I've got 2 9th and 2 10th and so forth, but now with this whole hybrid-y thing and so forth, 4 times. So just make sure I tell you what you need to know. Yeah, okay. So anyway, you've got your textbooks. Use those at home. What is the key thing do you need to know from the textbook? There's going to be quizzes on the textbook. And actually, this unit is pretty good as far as overlapping a lot of material with what is covered in class versus what is covered in the textbook. Because a lot of this unit covers the United States of America, the end of the 1800s and early 1900s, and the Spanish-American War and so forth. Can you read that? You're wondering when the quiz is?
No, I'm wondering if it's blue or green.
You're green.
Okay.
You're green. Oh, whatever. I'm guessing this is I'm getting a serious attitude from you. So here's the deal. Come in next week on Wednesday prepared for your quiz. Okay? I handed you guys the thing there. You okay with the fact that I didn't give you the page numbers? Oh my gosh. I never give, the first class I ever gave page numbers to. Yeah, you're special. It's in order. Do prepare. So as far as you're at home on the blue days when you're at home, here's what you need to do. Obviously, one of the things you're going to do is getting ready for my quiz. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. And the other thing is I've already posted it. I gave a video having to do with the Russo-Japanese War, a lot of the naval conflict, because that's going to be a big part of that war. And so I posted that already. So for you guys, and I think I indicated that that was for you to watch tomorrow. Okay? All right. So what do you do when you're not in my class tomorrow? Watch that one video. It's about half hour. And then you can go ahead and get started getting ready for the reading quiz, because that's coming up next week. I'm sorry, what?
If your videos are all YouTube, you can run on 3 times.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can hear me talk even faster than normal. Yeah, I got to figure out how to record it differently, because when I recorded that 1 day's worth, right, it took twice as long, 6 hours to upload it. And I'm like, I need to get that figured out. So, yeah. Because I need to adjust one of the settings because it's just taking too long. I mean, I was babysitting it forever. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Another thing to start thinking about, because fairly soon we're going to be getting started on the History IA research process. Okay? I will give you material to train. I will train you in class. And then the big takeaway there is you need to figure out something that you're interested in doing research on that has to do with history. And I'll tell you at the time, probably better that it's, within the last 100-ish years, because there'll probably be more materials there. It's probably better if it has something to do with maybe an English-speaking country, because then the primary sources will be written in a language that you're very familiar with, I guess, English. And then, so I'll do the training. I'll have you go do some research to find out that there's actually sources out there. Because I learned the hard way in the past, if I sit down with a student, come up with a really cool question for a topic and stuff, and then they go out and they start researching after we come up with a question, and they find out that there isn't the sources there, that's no good, because then we don't get a paper. So what we do is we have you find out, gather resources early on, so we know that that's going to be a successful project. That's going to be a big part of your grade this semester, that first draft of your history IA. That'll be due toward the end of the semester. And then you do a nice job on that one. We'll sit down at the beginning of next semester. We'll give you some tips on how to improve it, and then you make improvements, and voila, turn in your final draft end of second semester. You're in great shape at the end of at the end of your junior year. I dare say, compared to probably all your other IB classes and whatever, you may be in the best shape in history as far as just like the timetable, because you've gotten a lot of things taken care of. Okay? All right, and I'm serious. You don't have to choose a topic that deals with the stuff we're doing in here. You'll be tested on that separately. You could do a topic on, I don't know, the history of something to do with modern diving or athletics, or I mean, there's all kinds of really cool. There's cool things. We will find one that will work for you. Okay, so that's coming up. Today we are going to be focusing on the Russo-Japanese War. So take out your notes. Have your notes out. Ready? Chop, chop. The Russo-Japanese War between Russo and Japanese. You're like, who are the Japanese? Well, we know that part. Who are the Russos? The Russians. Yeah, I mean, it's the Russians. So we got a war between Russia and Japan. Huh, cool, interesting, wow. You can tell sometimes when they have that, like the Spanish-American War, who's that going to be between? We'll cover that actually this unit. Spain and what American country? Oh my gosh. The United States of America. What about the Sino-Japanese War? Anybody have any idea? You got the Japan part, but what's S-I-N-O? What do you suppose that might be? Sino. Ariana, what do you think Sino is representative of? I'll give you a clue. It's not the S is not there, but the I-N is. What do you think, Carly? Rhinos? Oh my gosh, you guys. And it's China. Whenever you see like something Sino in history and so forth, I don't know, I didn't make this up. It has to do with China. So Sino-U.S. relations have to do with China and the United States. So when you read that, if you're ever reading something, you're like, who the heck is Sino? Where's Sino? It refers to China. So anyway, little things like that. Okay? All right, you guys cool with where you're at and so forth? Any questions?
No.
Okay? Have you guys all tapped into Google Classroom? Right? I mean, you guys like saw that I posted some stuff? The quiz? And actually, the handout that I gave you, I already posted that last week when I plugged it into the Google Classroom. Okay? All right. You guys ready? Okay. Okay. Let's do this. One nice thing that I do for you guys that you will appreciate is I generally try to teach all of this IB history in order of chronology. Okay, so the early stuff comes first. So even though this unit is going to be mostly about the United States and things the United States is involved in, there's a paper to topic, all these 20th century wars, and one of them occurs really early in the 20th century. I'm like, let's get that thing done first, right? Because the United States has a little bit to do with it, we'll see, but mostly it's between two big, important Asian powers, Russia and Japan, and it happens fairly early on. And let's identify some things about this Russian-Japanese war. It occurs near Japan and near Russia, but actually in another area. So we got Japan here, and then just to the north of that, and then continuing on to the west is Russia. We're going to see the Russo-Japanese War taking place primarily in and around China and Korea. And I'll give you a clue. China and Korea at that time period in history are not real powerful. Through most of history, China is a big deal, but at that time of history, it's important for you to know, and you're going to be reminded of this many, many times. China is weak, pathetically weak, and they know it, and they hate it. It's an interesting thing in history. When you learn history and so forth about different stuff that's happened in the past, and you're like, well, what relevance does that have to us today? Is China pathetically weak today?
No.
You haven't been paying attention, have you? Is China pathetically weak today? Hello, no. I mean, the United States, what were we like, say, remember this, in the War of 1812, when we sent troops up to Canada, and were we strong or kind of pathetically weak? I mean, we couldn't even beat the Canadians, and they were fighting British help. So, but the United States, if you look at their trajectory over history, is like fairly weak, strong, stronger. It's been a generally upward slope. In your lifetime, I wonder how that slope is going to go. Is it going to like level off a bit, or is it going to go down a bit? It's kind of scary for living in a country that goes down a bit. China, in the long view of history, has had ups and downs. In this particular time period of history, around 1900, they are at one of those serious downs. They know history. They know the long history. Does China like being down? No. Are they aware of that in their country? They are. They're playing the long game. Be aware of that. I like to teach history, but I like to teach it in such a way that also like has relevance to like where you're at. Because in your, hopefully, long lives, you're going to be living in the United States, perhaps, maybe other parts of the world, but China is going to play a big part of it. And so it helps to know kind of where they've come from and where they're at. Okay? It was pathetic back in those days. Everybody was beating up on China. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what happens. It was like, other countries are like, wow, you look really weak. You got all these wonderful resources. We're going to try and take them. Write this down. Japan and Russia fought a war to expand their influence. They wanted more territory. They wanted more stuff. Okay? I mean, that's essentially what the war was about. And we'll talk about Russia. We'll talk about China. We'll talk about Japan. We'll talk about Korea. But one thing I think is kind of interesting is like, I mean, some of the wars that we cover, you know, IB identifies them as like, it's interesting, and then you kind of move on. Like, for example, I'll teach you, I think next semester, about a war between Bolivia and Paraguay called the Chaco War. And that's very important for Bolivia and Paraguay, particularly at the time, but does it factor as much in, like, big world history? Maybe not as much. But what about this? Is Japan going to be a big deal, say, in the 20th century? I don't know. Are they ever going to, like, be at war with the United States of America? Yeah, I mean, make a note of this. Japan is going to be at war with the United States of America. That's going to be a big, big part of the part, at least, that the United States fights. So Japan's a big deal. What about Russia? We actually covered Russia in a unit last year. Is Russia going to be in conflict, opposition to the United States of America? Are they going to be a big foe, or are they going to be like, whatever? It's called the Cold War, and from 1945 until 1991, it was like a serious thing for the United States and many others. Oh, yeah, that thinks, yeah. So, I mean, it was weird, because you look back afterward and you're like, wow, they actually, got pretty far on what they were at. So, Russia and Japan are very interesting, because as they go into this war, they're going to find out some things about themselves and each other, and the world is going to find out some things. All right? First, most people thought when this war took place, who was going to win? A lot of people thought Russia was going to win. All right, let's talk about Russia. Okay, a lot of people thought Russia was going to win. I mean, Russia had a great season. They had great victories in the early part of the 1800s. Will they be as great like almost 100 years later? Well, let me see. Who did they beat? See if you can remember this. Who did the Russians beat? I mean, everybody else in Europe was losing to this country and their dynamic leader. And Russia beat them with the help from the winter, but also like retreat tactics, yes? Napoleon, what country? Oh, that's right, France, right? Russia beat Napoleon and France in the early 1800s. I mean, that's like, whoa, way to go, Russia. But here's an interesting thing, and this is the kicker. This is going to help explain a lot of things in history, even still today. What do you suppose Russia didn't do enough after that victory as a country as they went through the rest of the 1800s that European countries and the United States, for example, were doing? What? What did you say? Very good. Industrialization. Yeah, exactly. Modernize. Build your economy. Build factories. We saw last year a little bit. It's very hard if you're like mostly a peasant society to transition very quickly into a powerful industrial country. And Russia, we'll find out. By the time you get to 1900, they haven't industrialized enough. And Japan beats them. Oh, write that down. We haven't gotten to the details of the war, but I just told you, Japan wins, and pretty decisively. And that's a rude awakening for Russia. And it's a big surprise for a lot of other countries. They're like, whoa, Japan, where'd you come from? We'll get to that in a moment. But they're looking at Russia and going, man, you got some problems. You better fix that up because there's some potential threats to your West in Europe that you might be at war with in 10 years during World War I. Do you guys remember who Russia fought in World War I, among others? And those guys beat Russia bad? They're Germany, yes, that's right. And I mean, it's like, what is that going to cause? Like, if you lose to Germany bad during World War I, I mean, it's like that's going to upset your entire governmental structure? Yes. And what kind of new governmental system is going to come into Russia in the aftermath of their terrible defeat? Could it be communism? The animal farm pigs take over and so forth. So that's a big deal. I mean, things in history are important because, like, a big country with a communist government, does that have an impact on its neighbors in the rest of the world? In Russia, it did. China, it's going to as well. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, they weren't, so they beat Napoleon, and then they didn't industrialize, and then
They didn't industrialize enough.
enough.
Enough. It's like you got educated, but did you get educated enough for what is facing you as you enter into your adult years? I mean, that's, yeah. Yeah.
So then Japan beat them, and so they were already weak. And then Germany beat them.
In World War I, yeah.
So then there's
Yeah, and we're going to be covering Russia as we go into the 20th century. Because, I mean, this is where, like, you're thinking back, freshman year, oh, I'm starting to understand a little bit more why I had to read Animal Farm. What are they going to do in Russia in order to industrialize? They're going to build the windmill. It's like they're going to industrialize. I mean, the government's going to be like, you're going to work. And you're going to build hydroelectric dams and factories and railways. I mean, they'd already built a railway. Look on your notes. What was the name of the railway that had just finally sort of been completed by the end of the 1800s, early 1900s? I'll give you a clue. It starts out in the west, and it goes all the way through Siberia to the east coast. That's right. And the orchestra that plays, just kidding, the orchestra that plays on the is fictitious. I love that music, but it's, yeah, I mean, it's like they came up with a name. So, I mean, that's cool. Okay? So, Russia. They just didn't industrialize enough. I mean, that's hard. You've got to have a lot of people that moved into cities and investment and so forth, and you're like, and sometimes it's just like, you got to shake it. You just don't know. I mean, I hope this doesn't happen in your life where you get to a point in time you're like, oh, I should have been better prepared for what I'm facing. I got some remedial work to do. Yeah, I mean, because this is like a historical thing. It applies to people individually, and it's a historical thing. And actually, and sometimes it's no fair because you can be working really, 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 really hard and becoming really good at some industry, and all of a sudden, they don't do that industry anymore. They've moved past it, right? I mean, it's like someday, who knows? I remember this debate having it with people, and like, it's come right here. Can you just replace teachers and like put in some like software database, and like you just gonna like have a robot as your teacher? How many guys are like, I want a robot as my teacher? Do you want a robot as your teacher? I don't know. I don't know about that. But I mean, yeah. So I mean, there's various different things and change and happen over. I mean, you may have to in your lifetime change jobs, careers, and you definitely will need continual training as you go along. I mean, I've had to have continual training as I've gone along, mostly like tech stuff. Lovely. All right, let's talk about Japan. You ready? Okay, let's talk about Japan. Because we haven't really talked too much about Japan. I mean, in 10th grade, we did the whole Russia thing. We got Japan. Do you know where Japan is? Where the heck is Japan? Japan's up on the map, right? I mean, it's like, here's Asia, and it's like, I don't know, it's East Asia. It's an island nation off the coast of East Asia. Write it down, Japan. It's an island nation off the coast of Asia. And here's the deal about Japan. Here's the thing that you need to understand about Japan, because a lot of people throughout most of history are like very dismissive of Japan, are like, there's Japan. I mean, are they going to amount to much? I mean, come on. They're not nearly as old and cool and large and civilized and prosperous as what other great East Asian civilization country thing. China, write that down. Before there was Japan, there was China. Japan was kind of like off the coast. But they did develop a separate Asian identity. Make sure, that's very clear. Because when people look at like East Asia, and you're like, well, what are the East Asian identities? Well, there's Chinese, bless you, and then, bless you, and then there's what? There's Japanese. What else is there? What else are you like, well, that's a distinctive, there's Korean. We're going to talk about that too, exactly. There's Korean, okay? This is the day that we talk about those. So Japan develops itself off the coast of Asia. It's got influences from China and so forth. But here's the tricky thing. It's never as big as China. It's never as prosperous as China. It's got a bit of a chip on its shoulder. Because the Chinese are like, we're cool. I mean, it's like, through much of history, the Chinese attitude was, we're better than the rest of the world. In fact, they were like, we could build big ships and go explore the rest of the world, but why do that? Because the rest of the world isn't as great as China is. I mean, imagine having that kind of neighbor. What an attitude. And you're like, all the better if they live far away. But if you're from Japan, it's like right across the water. It's a constant reminder. China is just like, wow. So, I mean, the Japanese developed this sort of chip on their shoulder. And yet here is something's going to happen in history, because in the 19th century, China is going down. And Japan, as we'll see, is going to be coming up. They're going to come up, and they're actually going to win that war against Russia. And as they go into the 20th century, boom, Japan is going to be messing with people in its neighborhood. I mean, Japan versus China in the 20th century, who are you going to pick? Japan beats China bad, 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 bad. I mean, who is going to stop Japan in the mid-20th century from expanding further and further and further? The United States of America. Yeah. Interesting how that all plays out. So here's the deal. So when the Europeans first showed up, some of you guys might remember this from 9th grade, when the Europeans were first exploring and setting up trade and so forth, they popped into Japan, and the Japanese are like, interesting, guns, wow. And they actually had guns for a while, and they employed them in their wars. But eventually, key thing, write this down, Japan decided, no, we don't want anything from the West. They isolated. For about 300 years, Japan was almost entirely isolated from other parts of the world, especially the West. Now, they would still trade with, like, I don't know, the Netherlands a little bit, and they would trade with China. But mostly they're like, no guns, no Western influences, no Western religion. We're going to do things the Japanese way. Because they felt the Japanese way was the best way, the honorable way. You don't fight with guns. Anybody can take a gun and point it at somebody and kill them. Where's the honor in that? I mean, you've got to be skilled. You've got to go through training. You've got to have like a whole samurai ethic. And yet, here's the thing, right? I mean, if you've seen the Indiana Jones thing, who are you going to pick? Indiana Jones with a gun or some guy with a sword? At a distance. No. Close up, maybe the sword, but at a so it's like Japan, for 300 years, they're isolated. They're like, we've got the best thing. And they had no strong central government, no national. They had an emperor, but the emperor wasn't powerful. The real power was in local warlords. in Japan for like 300 years. Local warlords and so forth. And they fought their wars, and they're like, but yeah, we're Japan and everything's cool. Is it? Is it really? Put this down. 1850s. In the 1850s, somebody showed up in Tokyo Bay and said, Japan, I want to negotiate with you. Who was it? I'll tell you. They brought modern ships, modern for that time, made of, in part, metal, painted black. They were from the United States of America. The United States of America showed up in Tokyo Bay, said to the Japanese, we want to trade with you. We would like to open up trading relations, and we're not going to take no for an answer. And we've noticed that you guys really are kind of stuck. You're not industrialized. You're stuck in the past. So what did the United States say? We're coming back next year, and we want one answer. Yes, we will trade with you, the United States of America, or the United States of America will blow a hole in various different wooden ships and buildings and so forth. Do you understand that? So this is like a wake-up call for Japan. Now, they kind of got a sense already that there were problems amiss because they knew what was going on in China. They knew that in the early 1800s and mid-1800s, China was getting beaten down by Western forces. Like, poor China. They make stuff that so many people want throughout the world. Porcelain and silk. Yay. I mean, the English, as they were becoming industrialized and powerful, it was like the English were buying up all this stuff from China. And like the Chinese are taking in all this silver, and the Chinese aren't buying anything from the British, and the British are like, you're going to have to start buying our stuff. And the Chinese are like, no, we're not. Because there was this huge imbalance of trade. And the British are like, what could we sell them that would make it more balanced? It's like, let me ask you today, what's the balance of trade like with the United States and China? Do we sell them more? Or do we buy more stuff from them? We buy lots of things. We buy personal protective equipment. I mean, we for a while, and we were like almost entirely reliant on China as a manufacturer for a lot of things we really need. So when we were short of PPEs early in the quarantine period, China was like, we need ours. So anyway, anybody know what the British introduced into the trade of China in the 1800s that the Chinese were like, well, some of them are like, wow, we could really go for this. Drugs. Opium. Seriously. The British, they were like, wow, the Chinese like opium, or at least some of the people do. And the Chinese government's like, get your opium out of here, you foreign drug dealers. And the Chinese government tried to stop the British and others from selling opium because the British were selling lots of opium to the Chinese. Well, here's the deal. We found out early in the 1800s. Who was more modernized? Who was more industrialized? Who had the capability of having a strong military to win a fight in China? The British. Yeah, so the Chinese in the 1800s were losing battle after battle against outsiders, and they lost a lot of control over their own country. The Japanese were looking at this and going, we don't want that to happen to us. What should we do? Easy answer. If you're Japan in the 1850s and you've just been threatened by the United States of America, you don't want to end up like China across the water, what do you need to do? You need to industrialize. Write that down. And Japan really had to focus on industrializing and modernizing and doing everything they needed to do to become stronger so they wouldn't be beat up like the Chinese had been in the position of getting beaten up. Think about this. First, which governmental system do you suppose is in a better position to get those things accomplished, industrializing and stronger military and so forth? Two choices. Power spread out among all the feudal warlords that fight each other, every decade and so forth for hundreds of years. Or a strong central national government. How many of you guys go for the let's power be dispersed among lots of parts of Japan? And so they had done it. Survey says no. So the Japanese, write this down. The Japanese did have a national leader, and they're actually going to give that national leader some real power. His title? The emperor. The Japanese say, we've got an emperor, and we will look to the emperor to be our leader. Somebody was asking the other class, was that like The Last Samurai, the movie? Have you guys ever seen The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise and so forth? Have you? There's some parts of that movie that are really, really, I mean, there's a lot of cool parts of the movie, and some parts that are like completely false, and other parts that are true. There was resistance to having all the power go to the emperor and modernize the military and so forth. But the movie makes it seem like all the samurai were killed. They weren't. Put this down. A lot of the top positions, samurai and warlords and so forth, from before 1850, they had new positions. Guess what their new positions were? In the national government, in the national military, and in business. The founder of Mitsubishi, big Japanese corporation, was a former samurai. So it's like those people were like, they looked around, they're like, we agree, we want to be strong. And so they did it. And they did it fast. Write that down. They did it fast. It took Britain hundreds of years to industrialize, to become a very powerful country. The United States, a little bit less time. But those were the early industrial powers. Japan was like, we need to do this now. And over 50 years, between, say, 1850 to 1900, write that down, Japan industrialized. They built factories. They built modern warships. They built a modern military. And yes, it was fascinating because their military, the officers still had samurai swords as part of their uniform, but they also, their military was equipped with the latest guns. Because if they were going to get into a fight with somebody, they wanted to be in a position where they could win. Yeah. Oh, yes, they did. If you're an island nation like Japan, think Britain over in Europe, do you need a navy? You definitely need a navy. I mean, that's what helped Britain. This is going to help Japan. And so they actually did. They had a very good modern navy. Okay? Got that? So there we go. And they have ambitions. They're like, we're great, we're Japanese, and we're going to take over stuff. We're going to take over, we're going to have an empire because all those other Europeans and stuff, they've got territory here and territory there. We can do that too. And they didn't have to look very far to see some territory that they could take over. Where did they look? They looked over into China and Korea. Write this down. The Russo-Japanese War is going to be fought primarily in Korea and nearby Chinese areas. Okay?